Hey guys, this is Jeremy from mensagaming.net bringing you guys a Hearthstone related video. Today I'll be discussing the changes to the classic cards that Blizzard have recently announced. So for those of you that are unfamiliar or have been living under a rock for the last couple of months, we know that Blizzard is coinciding the release of their new expansion Whispers of the Old Gods with an introduction of the new standard format. This standard format will basically encompass the previous 2 years of releases. And that will see Goblins and Gnomes as well as Naxxramas leave the format. But importantly, they've announced that the classic set, so all the basic and common cards will remain, the basic cards will, as well as that classic set, will remain part of all the standard format card sets going forward, which just means that all those cards that you've known and loved as from the beginning and the inception of Hearthstone will stay relevant. And people have there's been a lot of conjecture and discussion about this kind of change, because it kind of means that kind of very staple cards like Fireball, Polymorph, Force of Nature, Savage Roar, all those really classic cards, powerful cards, will remain constant in the set. So we're in kind of games like Magic where as sets are released, you kind of see reprints of cards with different names, slightly different effects. You might have a Fireball-esque card. Instead of being 6 damage for 4 mana, it might be 3 mana and you get 5 damage or 4 damage. You see the that style of card being re-released but being changed, which kind of allows those games to stay fresh. So because Blizzard have announced that their classic set's going to remain constant, they also mentioned that they're going to be doing some changes to classic cards. So we've got those changes being released. I'll be covering those changes now in this video. I'll probably split it over a couple of parts. And then I'm going to save my Whispers of the Old Gods card review for one review that I will do, obviously a multi-part review, I will do once all the cards are released. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I feel that a lot of cards, especially cards that are part of a kind of greater synergistic release, or that, it's very easy to look at a specific card as it's released and make a judgment, and often those judgments are, this card is bad. But then, a few weeks later, you'll see another card or a series of cards released that will relatively empower this card and make it relevant in certain potential deck archetypes. So I think it's better and more savvy to kind of wait. Let's wait for all the cards to be released and then make a judgment on those cards. So today I'll be doing a review of the cards that will be nerfed. So this is relevant because it's easy for us to kind of get a glimpse as to why and how these are going to affect decks going forward, infinitely forward as they stay part of the classic set. So let's get started. First card we have here is the Ancient of Lore. So Ancient of Lore, really kind of immense druid card that we see in almost any druid deck you play, ranging from anything from your standard combo druid to your token druids to your slow control druids, even rush druids that there was a stage where people were running a lot of rush cards, a lot of really fast face deck kind of style druid. That deck would include at least one Ancient of Lore, just because that on that 7 curve, it plays around big game hunter, so you can kind of get a big threat while drawing more cards. And just continue to stay really lubricate your deck, kind of lubricate you with card draw. That's, as we can see here, that's been nerfed now so much. Going down from drawing 2 cards to 1 is a pretty huge change for the Ancient of Lore. So now it just becomes a cycle, a 7 mana 5/5 cycle. I don't really think that it becomes worth it at that level, because if you really want cycles or card draw, you can get that through other cards or other smaller minions, and the advantage of getting it through smaller minions is that you can play a smaller minion with card draw and then play another value minion that might have a more relevant battle cry or a more relevant death rattle or taunt or something like that alongside your card draw. So I think the Ancient of Lore is just too it's just too kind of clunky now. Having said that, the heal is still somewhat relevant. So if we start seeing really slow games, really slow metagame where that targeted heal becomes more relevant, I think the Ancient of Lore might see play, where you'll have the versatility, you'll get a minion, you'll have the versatility to cycle, or if, for example, you think it's going to go to fatigue and you don't really want more card draw, you might put that heal on your minion and get a more valuable trade. Like if you've got an 8/8 running into a 6/6, once that's on that 8/8's on 2 health, you heal it back up to 7. So something like that you would maybe see the Druid of Ancient of Lore become more viable, but unfortunately at the moment that looks like it represents a pretty huge nerf for that card. This next nerf is something that we kind of knew was going to happen. We knew that Force of Nature Savage Roar was already a pretty toxic combo in the metagame. We saw Druid just constantly staying relevant in tournament play because it could kind of pull a win. It only really needed to get you to 14 HP. Once a Druid got its opponent to 14 HP, it was just a matter of times trying to stall, trying to kind of pick at the taunt minions that were played, and just leave the opponent open to just being that copying that combo. So people were discussing it was kind of inevitable that this was a nerf of some form was going to go through. I'm glad that they nerfed this half of the card rather than the Savage Roar. I feel like Savage Roar is a really kind of valuable card. It's a fluffy card. It kind of fits the theme of Druid, delivering that kind of punch, enraging and kind of delivering a punch. And you know what? If you look at the new Force of Nature, obviously it's a lot weaker. For just that 1 mana discount, losing charge on those trance is huge. Like, you can't use it as removal. So, on 6 mana, sometimes a Druid would use Force of Nature as removal in certain matchups. You can't use it as removal. You can't use it as even an independent form of burst damage. At this point, it's purely like a value minion. So, in token decks, I could see it seeing some play, where it kind of, you kind of developing a board. You're getting 6/6 of stats for 5. It's similar to the card that summons the Wisps. It's just obviously benefits a lot from Power of the Wild. It still benefits a lot from Savage Roar, from Cenarius, but this is kind of, I think, a card that will basically move purely into a token Druid deck, and even in a token Druid, it might not be good enough to see play, unfortunately. So, yeah, it's a shame, but I think it was necessary. The combo was too toxic. It was stopping card development. It was kind of standing in the way of Druid getting a lot of other forms of cards because they didn't want, obviously, cards to be too synergistic with the combo. So I think this will just allow Druid to develop more as a class and will give Blizzard room to release more exciting mechanics for Druid. We move down and we see the Keeper of the Grove change. So, they've said their rationale is that it was a decision that Druids would always include Druids, these Keeper of the Groves, and I think that's a pretty fair summation. I couldn't imagine somebody constructing a Druid deck and wouldn't just throw 2 of these cards in. So you kind of have, obviously, it had the versatility of being used just as the ping, and that ping, I've watched, you see competitive play where the ping can be used in almost any context. It can be used to obviously ping off damage, to get a value kind of trade early game when your opponent might play something like just a 3/2 on 2, and then you can on your turn 3 you can coin out or innovate out this minion to not only remove but establish a really hardy minion on the board to contest the board. So really good early game versatility. Obviously, late game becomes quite effective. It can be used to deliver that final face damage through taunts. It can be used once again for value trades and value pings. But more importantly, that silence utility. Just the utility of having a silence on a card that has so much value outside the silence effect just made it one of the best cards, I think, in the game. And obviously a class card's allowed to be good, but I think this card may have just been too good. And I think this nerf, I don't know if it needed to lose 2 stats. I think it could have just become a 2/3, and that would have hurt it a lot because it would have meant that when it hits that 3/2 equivalent, it will die to the 3/2. But being a 2/2 means that it can't positively trade on 2/3s. It's 4 mana. It's quite expensive, but I think because it looks like the metagame might slow down a little bit, or at least that's what Blizzard's trying to do. If the metagame does slow down, then a silence effects are going to be extremely valuable, especially with some of the cards we're seeing released in Whispers of the Old Gods. So it might just be that it's a better kind of silence card than the kind of your equivalents. So things like Spellbreaker, you get a 4/3 for 4 with silence. Obviously, the Keeper of the Grove is straight up worse than Spellbreaker in terms of stat equivalent, so you lose 3 stats, which is huge because the Spellbreakers can trade up really effectively. But you gain the utility of being able to do the 2 damage ping. To be honest, I'm not sure if that is worth the stat loss for that utility, but we'll see how it plays out. So really, another really significant nerf for Druid. Then we can kind of see that they feel like Blizzard's rationale here. They feel that the silence effects, minion removal, are potent. and they feel like silence is a toxic element that kind of is very punitive. And we know with Hearthstone, Blizzard have tried to keep kind of very anti-fun mechanics out of the game. Things like discard, making your opponent discard, things that meddle with your opponent's decks and your opponent's kind of side of the board is generally something that isn't really present in Hearthstone, or not nearly as much as it is in other card games. So it's no surprise that we're seeing these kind of nerfs to Keeper of the Grove, and now we see the Ironbeak Owl. The Ironbeak Owl, I'm not sure personally whether it needed this nerf. I think that maybe this is just something that Blizzard wanted. Part of me personally feels that Hearthstone needed more kind of silence effects and more ways to kind of punish people for going all in on Death Rattle and kind of like taunt minions, Death Rattle minions. I feel like the main reason why silence is being kind of nerfed or up-costed is because of its ability to just remove taunt. I think Blizzard could have dealt with it in a different way. They could have made the taunt effect, or certain minions have like some sort of super taunt, or just make taunt immune to silence. Like make it count more as part of the minion's base ability rather than as kind of like a text. I think that would have been a better way to nerf silence rather than this upcosting, because this kind of upcosting just really rewards Death Rattle spam and just spam of kind of things that, in their own way aren't really fun or interactive. So we see the Owl going from a 2-mana minion to a 3-mana minion. So on 2, it became a really kind of decent 2-drop in a lot of contexts. Like if you're versing a shielded minibot, it would trade equally with the top kind of often top tier cards, things like shielded minibots, knife jugglers, cards that were at the top tier of 2-drops. The Ironbeak Owl, if it really absolutely had to, could trade evenly with these cards, which is pretty immense for what is a card with amazing utility outside of its stats. So I can understand why it kind of is being changed. I think if it was going to be upcosted, I could see it becoming a 2/2 for 3, just to make it, to kind of give it a little silver lining, making it immune to pings. But at 3 mana, I think that people will probably start choosing the Spellbreaker over the Owl. So for 1 extra mana, you go from being a 2/1 to a 4/3. So I feel like at this point, the Spellbreaker is being pushed into being the premier silence, which might be Blizzard's intention, because maybe they want silence to be more of a premium kind of effect that you need to deliver on an actual proper body rather than just on kind of a cheap little utility minion. So we can kind of see where they're getting at. This will obviously reduce the Owl's prevalence in some decks like Zoo and really rushy decks that would often use the Owl for just more tempo. So people would be happy to silence a pretty mediocre effect, just kind of small Divine Shield minions, things like that you normally wouldn't necessarily silence in a more controlly matchup. People would just drop the Owl, do their silence. So it could be like, silencing like a Void Caller or Void Walker, something that, obviously a Void Caller might be a premium minion to silence, but even an Imp Gang Boss, drop the Owl, silence the Imp Gang Boss in a Zoo Mirror, and just keep putting minions on the board and flooding the board. So at this point, I think the Owl will stop seeing play in those decks, and we'll rather see play in more in control decks, at which point people will probably just play Spellbreaker instead. So I think that's going to be a bit of a death knell for the Owl, which is obviously a bit sad. The next change, this is a huge change. It goes without saying, right? So Big Game Hunter, people were predicting this nerf. I've been holding on to golden Big Game Hunters, waiting for them to be nerfed for a long time. I feel like this card could have been nerfed in beta. In some ways, I'm surprised it's taken this long. It's such a powerful card for 3 mana. Not only do you get removal that's kind of on par with the equivalent spells like Shadow Word Death. I know people talk about the fact that it's not really like Shadow Word Death, because Shadow Word Death has more versatility, being able to target 5 attack or greater. But most of the minions you want to cast a Shadow Word Death on, more or less, very often, are bigger minions anyway. So Big Game Hunter was just so good, being able to create such a massive swing. If your opponent plays, a 6 or 7 cost big minion or greater, and you can kind of not only remove it for 3 mana, but get a body and then have more mana left over to play something else. It just was creating massive swings and would actually punish people for playing big value minions, which is a bit of a kind of counterintuitive paradigm, and I think Blizzard have realized that. I think they've known it for a while, but maybe this has been a bit of their plan. Maybe they've had this plan for going, for even up to a year or so. So they've decided to bundle all these changes into one big kind of, I guess, just change to the game with the inception of Standard. So we can see here, Big Game Hunter. Now it's basically, it's 5 mana, so the 2 extra mana hit, and it's kept the same stats and kept the same battle cry. Some people thought they would maybe kind of do more of a moderate change where it would keep a lower cost, but instead of doing just killing, it might do like 4 damage or 5 damage to a minion with 7 or more attack. So it would never just like 1 for 1, like instant trade, and then still be there. So that's more of like a 2 for 1. But now it's just more expensive. So to be honest, I think it'll still see play. I think this mana change won't change really the swing that's being caused. You're still killing a massive minion, and you've still got a 4/2. So it still is a 2 for 1 against big minions. It just doesn't let you do as much with the rest of your turn. But very often in kind of in control matchups, you might not be wanting to flood the board anyway. So you might play big game at 10 mana. If your opponent plays a big creature, it doesn't really matter what it is. Could be a big dragon. You can still, play a Big Game Hunter and play Lothar. Or obviously Lothar will be out, but another equivalent big kind of 5-drop card, even like, the equivalent something like a Pit Fighter. Just a card that you're getting value from. So, like there's some really nice Death Rattle minions coming out. And so I just don't know if this is really that much of a nerf for Big Game Hunter. It changes, like even something like you look at kind of Handlock and how Handlock would tap, play Mountain Giant on turn 4. You can still answer that with a BGH. So I don't know. I just don't think this nerf was enough, to be honest. I think they needed to change, maybe change its stats as well. Maybe make it a 2/3 and 5 mana or something. I don't know. But it'll definitely still see play. Hunter's Mark. This was, they're saying it's too efficient for 0. And they're making it 1 mana, 1 cost 1. To be honest, I think if it obviously kind of hurts face hunters a bit that would always eke out like mana games. Thousands of games obviously have been won or lost on that last mana. Can the hunter squeeze enough damage into that last, into their 8 or 9 mana they might have available when they're finally making that final push? So Hunter's Mark going to 1 does hurt that, but it's when the metagame slows down and control kind of becomes more important. Hunter's Mark becomes a better card as well because it's such a like good card to get tempo. It's such a cheap card to eke out tempo for those kind of mid-range hunters that might have a Savannah Highmane on the board, be really pushing, and then your opponent might play a big taunt, and if you can efficiently get through that with a token and the 8 of Hunter's Mark, then it's giving you so much just tempo. So it's still going to see play, and it's still a good card. So I don't have too much of a problem with this nerf. Blade Flurry. So Blade Flurry, they've said it's a problem because it's a board clear and burst. I think Blade Flurry was such a massive card. Like it created so many games with just one off the Blade Flurry, and it became Druid. It pushed Rogue into a situation where Rogue would just almost any Rogue deck you played had to have card draw. They had to be able to lubricate through their deck, cycle through their deck to the point of not only having Blade Flurry, but kind of having weapon buff cards. So it just made Rogue, just all about just getting those weapon buffs, getting Blade Flurry, setting up a situation where you've already got minions on the board, you can clear their board, push damage, and just overwhelm. So I can see this. This is a huge nerf for Blade Flurry though. Like you look at what's happened to the card. It's gone up in mana, and it only deals its damage to minions. This is really going to hurt Rogue. Like either of those changes would have been big. If they made it 4 mana and left its effect, it would have been a nerf, significant nerf. Or if they just made it affect minions, it would also have been a significant nerf. I feel like this combination nerf is definitely an over nerf. And I think it's just going to kill the card. I mean, I don't know what they've got planned for Rogues, but doesn't make Blade Flurry bad as such. Like it becomes like Shadow Flame in a way. Like you kind of use it in the right context and it gets massive value. If you kill 4 or 5 minions with the one card, obviously you're getting ridiculous value, but it just makes it way less of a tempo kind of push. It reduces its level of aggression and makes it more of like just a board clear, just a desperate board clear type thing. So it's kind of going to resemble Shadow Flame, Brawl. It's going to be, some rogues might run one of these just for a very extreme situation. But yeah, it's definitely going to hurt Rogue a lot, this nerf. What I might do there is I might end video 1 there. So we've looked at all the class cards, and then we're going to look at these. We're going to move forward and look at some neutral minions. So thanks guys for watching, and stay tuned for part 2. Cheers.